Matthew 18, verse 6. But who shall offend one of these little ones, which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck, that he were drowned in the depth of the sea. Welcome to everyone that's here. Thank you for coming. Under copyright disclaimer, under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringed. Excuse me, sinuses are bothering me, so please forgive me. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use. Thank you, everyone, for coming. This is an important story, which most of these are when it concerns an individual, especially a child. Former youth in New Hampshire Detention Center demand a federal investigation into abuse allegations. Good to see you again. Hi there, Jackie. Thoughts and prayers. Lots of love to you too. Thank you. So we'll get to the gist of the story now. Y'all know I always show or try to show the page where I get the information from. Former residents of New Hampshire's youth center demand federal investigation into abuse claims. There's where it is right there. That's how it looks right there. The Sanu Youth Services Center in Manchester, New Hampshire stands among trees January 28, 2020. Details of the criminal investigation into abuse at New Hampshire's Youth Detention Center must be shared with attorneys for former residents who have sued the state, a judge ruled. Judge Andrew Schoolman granted a motion Monday, August the 21st, 2023, seeking to force the Criminal Bureau of the Attorney General's Office and state police to comply with the subpoena issued by lawyers for close to 1,000 men and women. See, what close to 1,000 men and women they had been victimized when they were kids, who say they were physically, sexually, or emotionally abused as children at the Sununu Youth Services Center in Concord, New Hampshire. The frustrated former residents of New Hampshire's only youth detention center are pushing for a federal investigation into allegations of decades of abuse. We'll go back to that part in a few minutes. We'll still do this story, but we'll go back. Sununu Youth Services Center in Manchester's previously called the Youth Development Center, has been under criminal investigation by the state since 2019. 10 former workers and an 11th who worked at a pretrial facility in Concord were arrested in 2021. Close to 1,000 men and women have sued the state, alleging physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, but the slow pace of the criminal and civil proceedings has some calling for the Federal Department of Justice to step in. They need to step in. I don't know why they got involved yet. Our kids are a commodity. Our kids are very important. Get the state out of it because they're not looking to give us real justice, says Charles Glenn, who spent several years at the facilities in the mid 90s. They're complicit to sexual physical violence in this institution for over 40 years because for over 40 years they've done nothing. The people that advocate against sexual abuse about these things being done to children I hope that y'all share this as well. Glenn, age 42, helped organize a rally Friday afternoon in Concord where several former residents and their supporters spoke. He did not attend because he suffered a 30-year to life sentence for second-degree murder, but his fiancée spoke on his behalf. Hey, when you're essayed, it does affect your life. Michael Gilpatrick holds a copy of his intake photo from New Hampshire's Youth Detention Center as he and other former residents of the Youth Development Center, now called the Sununu Youth Services Center, held a rally outside the State House in Concord Friday, August 25th, 2023, to press for a federal investigation into the claims of physical and sexual abuse. In this lawsuit, Lynn alleges he was raped by three workers at the youth center and beaten by a dozen more, suffering multiple broken bones. Juveniles, you're supposed to be able to try to correct the child. You're not supposed to do more damage where they'll be violent or volatile later on and stuff. Glenn said in a phone interview that the abuse started within a week of his arrival, when he came out of his room one night after having a nightmare and was dragged back in, put in restraints, and beaten. Oh, man. I kept screaming and crying, and I was scared to be in there, and they wrapped a towel around my face to muffle the screams, he said. Yeah, it is unbelievable. These were adults doing this to the children. The abuse escalated when he was moved to another housing unit, Glenn said. We were combative verbally, and they wanted to demasculate us and humiliate us and do something that would break us. Still, that is no excuse for doing the kind of things they did to these kids, well, when they were kids. Green Moon, age 40, who spent 3 years at the facility in the late 90s, said workers in the girls' cottage looked the other way when male staffers from other dorms showed up at night. They looked the other way. They just let it happen. They just let these guys rape these kids. Just looked the other way. They were just as sick as the men who would come and rape us. They never seemed to question why my abuser would come to my room in the middle of the night and close the door behind him, she said. I never knew when I would get a surprise visit in the middle of the night. Exactly. Why are people not vetted properly before getting near any kids? I think they were saying that these were bad kids, so they didn't care about them. Like they deserve whatever corporal punishment. They don't deserve this kind of punishment. You're there to try to hope that they change their life for the better. You're not there to try to cause more destructive behavior. Yet others argued it is a conflict of interest for separate teams from the Attorney General's office to both prosecute alleged abusers criminally and defend the state against allegations in the civil lawsuits. So the state teams of attorneys, to prosecute alleged abusers criminally, and then they defend the state. How about that? Yes, it is. It's safeguarding going horribly wrong. You're right, Jackie. We want an apology from the state of New Hampshire, and we want a federal investigation. Michael Gilpatrick, who spent several years at the facility in the 90s, said in an interview, we don't want them to continue belittling us. They need to pay for what they done, too, criminally. Michael Garrity, spokesperson for the New Hampshire Attorney General's office, said Friday the state's criminal investigation remains active. And why ain't you done something sooner? Excuse me, why haven't you? He referred questions about a possible federal investigation to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Spokesperson there said she could not neither confirm or deny the existence of any investigation. Cannot confirm or deny? Hmm. In similar cases elsewhere, the U.S. Department of Justice reached a settlement in 2022 with the South Carolina Department of Juvenile Justice after finding state officials were violating the rights of incarcerated youth by failing to protect them from fights, forcing them to spend days or weeks in isolation for minor offenses, and failing to provide mental health treatment when they threatened to harm or kill themselves. Okay, who would have paid for that? They would have killed themselves. Who would have paid for it? Wouldn't be any way for the parent to get their child back. In 2021, federal investigators said isolation practices and lack of mental health services at Connecticut facility were seriously harming children. The Justice Department is also examining whether children in 5 Texas youth detention facilities have been protected from physical and sexual abuse by other residents and subjected to excessive use of sedation drugs and isolation. Oh man. The New Hampshire Youth Center, which once housed upward of 100 children, but now typically serves fewer than a dozen, is named for former Governor John H. Sununu, father of current Governor Chris Sununu. Lawmakers have approved closing the facility and replacing it with a much smaller operation, likely in a new location. Smaller operation? What do you want to do? Keep the kids were smaller things were smaller numbers and you would not get it out there. Story has been corrected to state that Charles Glenn's sentence is 30 years to life, not 40 years to life. That his fiancee, not wife, spoke on his behalf at the rally. Okay, and then it goes on up here. It gets more in depth with the decades of abuse. You would not believe this. When I started reading part of it earlier, and I was like, oh my goodness. Get this out of the way, stupid ads. Stupid ads. Okay, hundreds claim decades of abuse by 150 youth center staffers. See, it's much more than just the 10 or 11. Look at there, 150 youth center staffers. Look at that, 150 of them. One of four, a plaintiff who does not want to be identified is interviewed regarding a class action lawsuit accusing the state of New Hampshire of covering up decades of sexual, physical, and emotional abuse at its youth detention center, poses at his lawyer's office. See, Thursday, February 18, 2021, in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. The lawsuit against the state now spans 6 decades, with 150 staffers accused of physically or sexually abusing 230 children. That 230 children? And this was published March the 1st. So they had let them know prior and nothing is basically being done. Concord, New Hampshire abuse allegations against New Hampshire's state-run youth detention center now span 6 decades, with 150 staffers during that time accused of physically or sexually harming 230 children at a facility the victim's attorney calls a magnet of predators. That's right, a magnet of predators. Exactly. Pedophiles, predators. Russ Riley sued the state in January 2020 on behalf of 3 dozen adults who alleged they were abused as children at the Youth Development Center in Manchester between 1982 and 2014. He now represents 230 clients who say they were abused between 1963 and 2018 when they were ages 7 to 18. See, not only went from 1982 to 2014, but also representing 1963 and to 2018. So it's been a long time. As the number of years accusers and alleged perpetrators has swelled, so too has the sickening nature of the allegations. While details beyond the updated number of accusers and time span aren't included in latest court documents, Riley plans to add his clients' accounts to the complaint and describe them to the Associated Press. Of the 150 accused staffers, more than half of the accused are accused of sexual abuse, Riley said. Children were gang raped by counselors, beaten while being raped, and forced to sexually abuse each other. He said some ended up with sexually transmitted diseases, one ended up pregnant. And it goes on to say staff members choked the children, they beat them unconscious, burned them with cigarettes, and broke their bones, Riley said. Counselors set up fight clubs and forced kids to compete for food. Children were locked in solitary confinement for weeks or months, sometimes shackled or strapped naked to their beds, kept away from classrooms while their injuries healed. Some can't read or write today, he said. Oh, yeah, this is horrible. These children, shattered children, were then unleashed into society with no education, no life skills, and no ability to meaningfully function, said Riley. The Manchester facility, now called the Sununu Youth Services Center after former Governor John H. Sununu, serves children ordered to secure institutional setting by the juvenile justice system. But the juvenile justice system did not protect them. It was their responsibility to protect them. The average population last year was just 17 residents overseen by about 90 employees, though it once housed upward of 100 youths and employed a larger staff. Boy, and they know about all this and they did nothing. Joe Rinsam, director of the State Division for Children, Youth, and Families, said the agency continues to cooperate with a broad criminal investigation into the center launched by the Attorney General's office in 2019. It did not comment on the new allegations. The facility's policies and systems that protect the youth receiving care include full compliance with the Prison Rape Elimination Act and security cameras throughout the facility to provide additional sets of eyes on staff and student interactions, Ribson said in a written statement. Well, how's that going to help them today? How's it going to help them? You don't ruin their lives. You don't ruin all these people's lives, not letting them have an education. You don't ruin their lives, man. It's unclear how far up the chain of command knowledge of the alleged abuse traveled over the years, but the lawsuit alleges that some supervisors were themselves abusers and that other staffers looked the other way. I'm sure that's why the kids are groomed for all the abuse and other workers that turn an eye. They are to blame too. That's for sure. They are just as guilty when they look the other way. The systemic governmental child abuse that occurred was allowed to occur because there wasn't sufficient oversight and the state was institutionally negligent in their hiring, training, supervision, and retention policies. Well, with their common sense, excuse me, with the common sense, it ain't got nothing to do with whether or not they were really trained to take care of children. You should know common sense on how to treat a child. You know not to go and beat them. You know not to break their bones. You know not to do sexual things to them. But yes, they should have policies in there. But even though they're supposed to have some policies, it still went through the system. Riley said it's pretty clear to me that this facility was a magnet for predators. This is one that get to know what it like in this story, wasn't he? Raleigh said most of his clients had spoken to state police as part of the criminal investigation, including one man who spent 2 years at the facility in the late 2000s. The man alleges that he was sexually assaulted by two staffers more than a half a dozen times, was beaten by six staff members at once. At one time, six staff members beat him. And it was adults against a child, and often locked in his room for a week at a time. Now 28, he said he had been in and out of the criminal justice system most of his life and has struggled with depression, strained relationship, and a warped sense of socially accepted behavior. They should have been nowhere near the kids or vulnerable adults. And for the supervisors to have that much weight in doing what they were doing, I think there was probably even a higher up above them that was saying it was okay to do this. Had to be for the supervisors all to be doing these things. Think about it. Kids that don't have it good in there, we don't come out good, he said. It takes part of you, the worthlessness you feel afterwards. Am I good enough for people? Am I good enough for myself? Another man, now 29, spent more than a year at the center starting in 2000. He alleged he was beaten several times and sexually assaulted by three different staff members dozens of times, including a sexual assault that he says was recorded on a perpetrator's cell phone. Ooh, ooh. It was recorded when he sexually abused him. It was recorded on his cell phone. After years of substance abuse, he has been clean for 7 months, but nightmares and other PTSD symptoms continues. Thank God he's clean, trying to straighten his life out. Yeah, I hope they do shut it down. I'll relive it a lot, every night, every other night. It never stops, he said. Neither of them have any records of their time at the center, though they said they have requested them and gave state police officers who interviewed them permission to do the same. See, they should be able to have access to the records too, don't you think? Associated Press does not typically name people who say they have been victims of sexual assault unless they go public, like the lawsuit's lead plaintiff, David Meehan. Meehan is 39 years old when he went to the police in 2017 with allegations of abuse from the 90s. In July 2019, two of his former counselors were charged with 82 counts of rape. The Attorney General's office launched a broader criminal investigation into the center's operation and employees from 1990 to 2000. That's just 10 years of investigation. Those charges were dropped last March. What? They dropped the charge March 2020? March 2021. Let me go back up here and find out when this was. How to get that out of the way. Get back up here to the thing up here. I know this was in March. Okay, published March 1st, 2021. So it had to be March 2020 when they dropped the charges after the investigation. How stupid is that? Charges were dropped last March when the office announced it was devoting an unprecedented allocation of resources to an expanded investigation, including assigning 10 state police troopers to a task force. But you dropped the charges? Excuse me? Get back over here. July 2019, two of his former counselors were charged with 82 counts of rape. and the Attorney General's office launched a broader criminal investigation centers operations. Those charges were dropped. The 82 counts of rape. What? 82 counts of rape, and they dropped the charges? And once you go like that to have them in court, and all that, they get that criminal thing. You cannot go back and retry them. That's just wrong. Meanwhile, the state has been granted several extensions in responding to the lawsuit, and as recently as January said in court documents that the parties were in discussions aimed at narrowing or resolving the matters and issue in the case. But earlier this month, the state filed a motion to dismiss the case in part because it said the case didn't meet the criteria for a class action suit. What? It didn't meet the criteria for a class action suit? What the heck are you? Ooh. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Oh man, maybe you need to be charged too. State needs to be completely sued. They need to look at. The Attorney General's office declined to comment on the new allegations or the lawsuit. There are dedicated procedures. Oh, sorry. There are dedicated prosecutors in the Attorney General's office as well as investigators for New Hampshire State Police who are working daily on this investigation. Acting Attorney General Jane Young said in a written statement. The investigation will follow the evidence wherever it leads. Not if you keep dismissing the charges. Excuse me, y'all need some feds in there to prosecute y'all. Y'all are not doing, that's not doing it justice. Basically an open shut case, man. You keep dropping the charges against people, giving it another reason. That counselor was charged, had 80 charges against him for rape. In a recent interview, Mihan said has been frustrated by the pace of the legal process, but understands it will take time. He said he's grown stronger every day, in part because he has inspired others to come forward, including the two who spoke to AEP. It's heartwarming in a way to know that I helped these other people find the strength to be able to speak the truth about their experience, he said. But at the same time, it hurts in a way that I can't explain, knowing that so many other people were exposed to the same types of things that I was. And then still nothing being done. That's the problem. Being exposed, doing all this kind of stuff, that being a state facility for the kids. The state's responsible for whatever happened. He had said he has no regrets about speaking out. I can't allow the abuse that I endured to be what destroys my life anymore, he said. That's strong. I guess that's the end of that story on that part. So let's go back to this other part on we got the decades of abuse, and here's the with the 10 former workers. This is so wrong at times. Yeah, it is. Arrested new. Look at the perpetrators here. Look at these perpetrators. Sickos. This combo of a dated handout book and photo provided by the New Hampshire Attorney General's office shows for top row left Bradley Asbury. Y'all remember any of these names too, and y'all hear them? Steer clear away from them. Jeffrey Buskey and Frank Davis. Frank. Bottom row for left, Lucian Follett, James Woodlock, and Stephen Murphy. The six men were arrested Wednesday, April the 7th, 2021, in connection with sexual abuse allegations at New Hampshire state-run youth detention center. The Attorney General's office said, very much Herbert. Four former youth detention center workers charged in connection with rape of a teenage boy were known as the hit squad and muscle of their dormitories, New Hampshire State Trooper testified Friday. They even had the testimony of the state trooper. Why cannot they use that kind of stuff in the case today? These other people that were doing what they did. These were just basically the muscle and the hit squad. What about the other people, the 150 of them that did things to the kids? 150 abused from 63 to 2018. 11 men have been arrested this month as part of the ongoing investigation into the Youth Development Center in Manchester, including several who were in court Friday for hearings to set bail or determine whether there is probable cause to move forward with the case. The facility, now called New Youth Services Center, has been the target of criminal investigations since 2019, as well as a lawsuit in which more than 200 men and women alleged they were physically or sexually abused as children by 150 staffers from 1963 to 2018. But in mind, like I said, this was 2021 when this was written. Still no more arrests. You believe that? No more arrests since then? Bradley Asbury and James Woodlock are accused of restraining a teen at the center's East Cottage while he was assaulted by Jeffrey Buskey and Stephen Murphy in the late 90s. Asbury was the cottage's house leader. The attack happened after the teen was sent to his office, according to a trooper who interviewed the victim. The next thing he knew, he was carried by the four men up to a set of stairs. Trooper Joshua Buchanan said at Asbury's. The victim described the four men as some type of hit crew or hit squad. Buchanan said former colleagues also described them as clique or the muscle of the cottage and said they used physical force to de-escalate conflict. You got physical force to de-escalate, and yet you did all these other things. Of course, they're gonna fight for their way when they got a possibility of being murdered by these people, and knocked unconscious, raped, and all that. Excuse me. Of course, they're gonna fight. They ain't gonna want to be raped. They're not gonna willingly just say, "Okay, go ahead, take my body." Oh heck no. None, however, were aware of the sexual abuse allegations, the trooper said. Yeah, right. They always will say that none of them were aware. The former workers, that none was aware. But remember, they kept turning their backs, didn't they? A judge found probable cause to advance both Asbury's case and that of Gordon Thomas Searles, who was accused of coercing a teenage boy into performing a sexual act sometime between 1995 and 1998. The boy has been in and out of the youth center from age 12 to 18. Trooper Kelly LaPointe said at the hearing. He told LaPointe that he had been confined to his room and get out. Mr. That? What are you going to do for me for you to get out of here? What are you going to do for me? Oh my gosh. He told me he had been a victim and a perpetrator of sexual abuse in the past, and he kind of knew what was being asked of him, the point said. Separately, the lead plaintiff in the lawsuit alleges that in '98, Searles came into his room and saw that he had a bruised face, black eye, and split lip. David Meehan, who is not the victim in Searles' criminal case, says when he told Searles he had been beaten and raped, Searles cut him off and said, "Look, little fella, that just doesn't happen." The Associated Press does not identify victims of sexual assault unless they choose to identify themselves publicly, as Meehan did. It is absolutely gory. It is horrendous what these people were put into. What are you going to do for me? Oh, it just don't happen. You got the black eye and the busted lip and all this other kind of stuff, but oh no, it just don't happen. Excuse me, why are you denying it? When you're probably one of the perpetrators itself. But we know he's not a perpetrator when he goes like, "Oh, it just doesn't happen." So I guess he's the guy in charge, like we were saying, that was allowing it. Well, it just don't happen. Sexual abuse just don't happen. He should have tried to check the allegations to find out what happened. He didn't care about the kids. Poor kids, that's right. This person did not care about children whatsoever. And it said, like he said right there, so what are you going to do for me? And Searles had even uh, told Searles he had been beaten and raped. Searles cut him off and said, "Look, little fellow, that just doesn't happen." And as he asked the pair, how can he get out of that facility? He said, "Well, what are you going to do for me?" Yes, he's a perpetrator as well. He needs to go. He needs a full extent of law thrown at him. What are you going to do for me? Wow. Well, thank you so much for coming, Jackie. I get so mad about these kind of things happening. These are adults now, and I thank God that they survived, which some of them may have not survived. They probably took drugs and they got failed by the system poorly. They weren't protected. They didn't learn how to read and write. They didn't know how to take care of themselves. A lot of these people are probably homeless as well. And who's gonna believe you're a kid gaslighting children into being groomed? Exactly. Yeah, for him to have asked that boy, well, to get out of jail, I mean, to get out of that facility, well, what are you going to do for me? And put in mind, also, they had other buildings where they took them specifically to rape them. And remember, the girls also said that the ladies was over them turned their backs when the male from the other facilities came in there and raped the girls. One of them some of them had ended up with a venereal disease, and one had even ended up pregnant. And for all we know, it might have been other kids that ended up pregnant because of this as well. Not all the cases, not everyone's going to come forward and tell. We could come across on my screen over here. No problem. Thank you. You were the dedication for putting all this out. Well, thank you for being here. I really do appreciate and love you. And share it if you want to. And I'll say God bless you. And I hope that you have a great one. Please heal and get better soon. God bless you.